Here is The Atlantic's editor-in-chief, Jeffrey Goldberg.
Our next guest knows all too well that the fight for women's equality is not complete. She recently wrote a piece for The Atlantic about the struggle for women's equality and empowerment, a piece that, by the way, you can find right now in the lead position on our homepage at theatlantic.com. As the first woman nominated as a major party candidate for president, not to mention a former Secretary of State, Senator, and First Lady, she is the first to say that there is more work to do on this front. It's my pleasure to welcome Hillary Rodham Clinton back to the Atlantic Festival. Good evening, Secretary Clinton. Nice to see you.
Good evening. It's great to be with you.
Great. We're very happy to have you back at this all-digital, and as I said earlier in the festival, we hope the last all-digital festival that we're doing, but we'll see.
Let's hope so.
I wanted to, I hope so too. Let's turn first to the subject of the passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. More than almost anyone on the planet, you're responsible for the fact that we know who she is and that she's become this legendary figure. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what you saw all those years ago that made you think this is a person that your husband should nominate to serve on the Supreme Court. Maybe you can just share some recollections about her in that period.
Well, Jeff, I followed her groundbreaking legal work as a lawyer, as a law professor, and I was really impressed with how carefully she built her arguments to tear down barriers to women's equality. As many of your viewers probably know, her first groundbreaking case was representing a man who was denied the right to take a tax deduction for the care of his widowed mother, something that would have been available to him if he had been a woman. So Ruth understood early on that she needed to make the case to primarily judges who were white and male in the federal court system and the state system. And so she was so deliberative in building her case and making clear that her interpretation of the 14th Amendment applied to sex as well as race, and that therefore courts should be looking at any kind of disadvantage or disfavor in the law, either for men or women, based solely on sex with a very high degree of scrutiny. And when she was appointed by President Carter to the Circuit Court in D.C., she was an incredibly effective judge in working with colleagues like then Judge Scalia. And so her legal work, her litigation, her judicial experience all suggested to me when a vacancy opened up when Bill was just starting his first term, that he should take a hard look at Judge Ginsburg. And it was, as you might imagine, a heavily contested position. There were many people who were putting forth other very qualified potential candidates. But I arranged for the judge to come see Bill on a Sunday afternoon in the White House. And, you know, she basically was kind of snuck in, not to raise any unnecessary attention. And from the moment they sat down and started talking about the law and the Constitution, I could tell that they had hit it off. And certainly after that conversation, Bill said, "I really get what you're talking about. She'd be incredible on the Supreme Court." And so at the end, after all of his consideration, he appointed her.
Let me ask you this, and I ask you this as a former senator. Is there anything that your colleagues, the Democratic colleagues in the Senate, can do to stop what seems to be happening? Or is this the fait accompli? Is Donald Trump going to manage to get his nominee through?
Well, I think, first of all, it depends upon who the nominee is. And all nominees, as we know, go through a gauntlet of examination and questioning. Obviously, the votes seem to be there for whoever is nominated, but unpredictable things have happened in the past. My point to my former colleagues and others who have asked me is that we need to make it very clear what's at stake in this choice. I don't want it to be seen just as a partisan fight, Trump versus Democrats in the Senate and all of the drama that goes with that. I want people to understand what's at stake for them and their lives. And first and foremost, that's health care. The Trump administration, the Republican senators under McConnell have been trying to get rid of the Affordable Care Act for several years. They've tried and failed, but they never gave up their lawsuits against the law, trying to undermine and even eliminate it. So that will be heard, currently scheduled in the Supreme Court right after the election. And this new justice will take part, most likely, in those deliberations. And what we're looking at is the end of the Affordable Care Act, but more than that, the end of the guarantee that all people with pre-existing conditions will be able to access affordable, quality health care. We're going to see a real surge in people with pre-existing conditions because of the chronic after effects of COVID-19 for the people who have suffered it and now are reporting about heart problems, fatigue, and other things. So if you just take that one issue, and of course there are so many more, regulating, the environment and our clean air and our water and the climate crisis and so much else, to obviously say nothing about corporate power and women's choice and money in politics, all which I think have really set our country on the wrong track. That's going to affect every American. One or more of those issues will. So I think the Democrats in the Senate have an opportunity to really try to educate the public.
Let me ask you one other question on this. If the shoe were on the other foot, Republicans argue that the Democrats would be doing the same exact thing. Do you believe that to be true? That the Democrats, if they had the power, would be trying to ram through their nominee?
I don't believe that, and here's why. I think that the Democrats were so shocked, and understandably so, at the blatant abuse of the Senate rules and processes when they refused to allow President Obama to appoint a replacement for Justice Scalia 10 months before the next election, that there is within the Democratic caucus in the Senate a real fear that all bets are off, that there is no rule of law, there is no due process, there are no norms or principles governing anything anymore under the Trump and Mitch McConnell regime. So I think there would be a very significant discussion within the Democratic caucus as to whether it was good for the country to throw it into another partisan fight, 40 days before such a consequential election. Now, I can't predict how that would come out, but I think I know my former colleagues and others who are now serving well enough to know that it would have given them pause. They would not be demonstrating, the lust for power and domination that we have seen from McConnell, to the point where even colleagues who said, absolutely, we would not do this if it were to happen again, have clearly caved to the pressure to nominate and try to confirm someone quickly.
I want to turn to your now legendary Beijing speech from 25 years ago, but I have to ask one more question on politics, which is, you mentioned 40 days out. I have to. I get paid to do that.
That's right.
Yeah, but it's interesting to me. You have hard-earned experience running against Donald Trump. What advice have you given Joe Biden about the upcoming debate and about the next 40 days?
Well, I've given, my best advice about dealing with someone who literally will lie about anything and everything with a straight face, with impunity, who has a presence on the stage unlike anything that former Vice President Biden has ever, or any of us have ever dealt with. So be prepared, and be prepared not just to, talk about what you're running on, why you believe you're best positioned to really move our country forward, deal with all the crises from COVID to the economy to racial injustice and everything else. But know that you've got to figure out before you get on that stage how you're going to deal with the showmanship, the entertainment value, the smirking, the eyebrow raising, the shrugging, the whole physical presence of your opponent. And I know that Joe is well aware of these things because a number of the people who prepared me for my debates are helping him as well. It's unlike any experience anybody, whether you're on the Republican or the Democratic side, have had, because it used to be that at some point in a process like debates, if you were engaging in just outright falsehoods, the moderator, your opponent, would make that clear. But when you're dealing with someone who lies with abandon and often doesn't even know what he's saying or the implications of it, you have to stay focused on the message you're trying to convey to the tens of millions of Americans who will be tuning in. It takes an enormous amount of preparation and concentration to pull that off, as I know very well. But I think Joe has demonstrated a real sense of discipline and commitment in this campaign that I think will put him in very good position for the debates.
Beijing, 25 years ago. Spend a minute talking about the purpose of that speech, and then we can talk a little bit about how far women have come and how far they have not come. I really do recommend everyone go onto the Atlantic website or pick up the print copy of the Atlantic and read the piece that Secretary Clinton has written about this. But for those people who haven't read this yet, set the stage a little bit and talk about what you were trying to do 25 years ago.
Well, the conference was the fourth in a series of gatherings globally that the UN sponsored around women's issues. And it was in Beijing. And the idea behind it was to try to get agreement among 189 countries about a platform for action that would try to demonstrate very clearly what was at stake for women and to set forth frameworks for nations and the world at large to follow in making legislative and regulatory changes that would enhance the rights, opportunity, and participation of girls and women. I thought that was a critical issue for the United States because even 25 years ago, we understood that countries that value girls and women are more likely to be stable, more likely to be democracies, more likely to be prosperous, not posing national security challenges to our country and our allies. We also believed that the United States had an obligation to stand up for human rights around the world, and that we needed to make absolutely clear that when we talked about human rights, we were, of course, talking about women's rights. That was not taken for granted 25 years ago.
I want you to explain that to the youth. I really want you to explain that, because it sounds obvious today, but why was that controversial? And I ask that sincerely. Why was that a controversy that you were going to say that?
Well, I think, human rights had always been viewed as, primarily defending the freedom and the autonomy and all of what we think of as rights, like freedom of expression and of assembly, against authoritarian regimes, against war criminals. And of course, the United States had been on the forefront of standing up for those rights. And it was something that wasn't really a topic of conversation, that, women were often subjected to other forms of discrimination and neglect and oppression that didn't fit into pre-existing categories. If women were denied education, where did that fit into the human rights lexicon? Girls not being permitted to go to school or being taken out of school after third or fourth grade. What about mothers dying in childbirth because, trying to provide adequate medical care was not seen as a right? So we thought that it was time to make the case that human rights and women's rights were the same, so that it was no longer an ancillary conversation that would be held on the margins of human rights conferences and conventions and the like. And so when the UN invited me to come, I was determined to go, but there was a lot of opposition. There was opposition because clearly, China was a human rights abuser in our view, and they often imprisoned people who were protesting for greater rights. They often absolutely cracked down on the press if there was any kind of effort to communicate more freely, and you can go on and think about all of the problems that we were considering. Eventually, we were able to get agreement within the administration and disregard Republican members who said, no, don't go to this conference. It's anti-family, because anything that promotes women, in their view, by definition, is anti-family, as opposed to, my view, which is that promoting women is actually the way you strengthen families and communities. So I was able to go. But I want to just do a quick segue to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, because you say, talk to young people. When I was a young woman, I could not even get a credit card in my own name. The fact that I could get a credit card by the time I became a little older, in my mid to late 20s, was because of Ruth Bader Ginsburg and the cases that she was bringing. I couldn't have gotten a mortgage without being allied to a husband or some other man. So, the kinds of rights we're talking about in our own country were limited for women, even when I was young in the 60s and the 70s coming up. So Beijing was on a global stage because, of course, so many of the deprivations that we were concerned about were truly matters of life and death, not credit cards, but they were on a continuum of the ways in which families, communities, societies, governments really limited the rights and opportunities that girls and women had.
Right. In the 30 seconds we have left, talk about the work that you believe still needs to be done. You talk about, in this piece for The Atlantic, you talk about the power deficit.
Right. Yeah, I mean, now I look back, and yes, we've made progress in education and healthcare in particular, but not as much as we should have made in business and the economy, or in politics and government, or in national security and peace. And what I've concluded, as I write in the article, is that naming and claiming rights is no longer enough. You have to have the power to actually deliver on those rights. And I think that has to be the next real movement as women around the world move into more positions of responsibility and figure out ways to open more doors, drop down more ladders, change more laws, create more room, and have the power to actually implement those changes if we're going to continue to see progress, as I hope we will, in the next 25 years.
Again, you can find Hillary Rodham Clinton's latest piece in The Atlantic this month on our website, in our print magazine. And Secretary Clinton, thank you very, very much for joining us tonight. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Jeff. It's great to talk to you again.